Welcome to Chapter 12, John Coltrane. John Coltrane is from Hamlet, North Carolina. So he's one of ours, like Thelonious Monk. For those of you who are part of the North Carolina heritage, here's your required listening, only 2 pieces. And I'm going to recommend that you do listen to several of these things, and we'll talk about that through this slideshow. I'll touch on those and what I expect you to learn from those. Out of this quote from John Coltrane, I want to just emphasize my 3 favorite sentences here out of this quote. The first one is, "My goal is to live the truly religious life and express it in my music." And I think that's a very lofty goal. This next one is something that I experience in my own life. To be a musician is really something. It goes very, very deep. And the last one is, my music is the spiritual expression of what I am today, my faith, my knowledge, my being. And I would hold that any musical artist that is among the greats accomplished that, giving us a glimpse into their very being, their very faith and knowledge through their music. So Coltrane is definitely a giant in the musical world. He was born in 1926. He died in 1967 of liver failure, probably as a result from addictions, which he suffered from the mid-60s. He was only 40 years old when we lost him. He was known for combining great emotion with excellent musicianship, combining discipline with freedom. He was active really for just 12 years, from 1955 to 1967 in recordings. But his influence was far-reaching. He had this sound that was huge. His sound was big, dark, lush. He played tenor sax and soprano sax. The soprano sax, probably had a lot of influence on how he played the tenor sax, because he got a lot of technical facility on the soprano sax, playing very fast and in an upper range. And then when he got on the tenor sax, he just translated all of that there. And that was different than other players had done. He was very passionate about his music. On this listening list right here, it suggests that the first one, Agunde, that you listen for that dark, lush tone. The second one from Giant Steps, and I think it's pronounced Naima. You can also listen for his tone on that. Cousin Mary, listen for his drive, and sheets of notes that we're going to talk about here in just a second. His sheets of sound that he was famous for, and all blues also demonstrates that as well. Okay, so he was one of his influences was Sidney Bechet, which we studied earlier in this course. And he learned to improvise in the higher harmonics of the tenor sax, where a man's voice is pitched, and that's also where the trombone plays. He was a great coordinator of tongue and fingering, different than other players before him, so this was unusual. And this made him famous for his fast arpeggios, and one critic dubbed it the sheets of sound, the effect that he got, and that stuck. Coltrane himself thought that the sheets of sound runs, he thought of them when he was doing them as playing chords on top of chords. So layering chords, okay? They had a great emotional impact. He used sequences very expertly. And a sequence is when you take a small motive and you repeat it in succession, and it can be at different pitches. So, for example, you could have a cascading sequence which has a little figure da-da-da, and then goes down a half step da-da-da, 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 so listen for sequences in his music. You might want to comment on that when we do the listening. Okay, his musical evolution. Well, he started in bop. He definitely did cool and modal. He did hard bop, and he ended up pushing the boundaries into free or avant-garde. Okay, some of the listening that they talk about are all blues, which we've already mentioned, So What, and Freddie Freeloader. So What you've already listened to in Chapter 10, and there was a listening guide with it. You might want to review that. Freddie Freeloader is from the Kind of Blue album. He played somewhat arrhythmically or on top of the beat. You can hear that in Countdown, Spiral, And the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost is an unusual piece where you really hear that arrhythmical, well, just how he articulates in tone. Just give that a listen, or part of that a listen. He did suffer from addictions from 1956 on, and he made his most famous albums while he was addicted. His early death was from liver cancer. Giant steps. Well, as the name implies, this is a giant movement in Coltrane's influence here. So he added his own harmonic scheme on this, and that's different. So if you get a chance to listen to that, go right ahead. He pushed the range and tone of the saxophone by using false fingerings. Eventually he improvised melody from melody instead of from harmony. So most people improvise over harmony and they take their notes from the harmony, but he's doing it from melody to melody. And this is something that classical composers do. Thelonious Monk bore a great influence on his sense of melody and chords, and especially in encouraging him to use wide leaps in his melodies. These false fingerings he used were new fingerings where he'd get a sound out that was an unusual fingering from the normal one, and that would change the tonal color of the note. He broke the format of theme, solo, theme that jazzers have been using forever. And if you listen to Countdown, you might hear that. If you listen to India, you'll hear how he incorporates Indian scales and rhythms. He developed the sound and texture of his groups through improvisational freedom, and he encouraged this interaction amongst the band members. All of his bands had an intensity. He also changed the texture intensity of his bands by adding multiple drummers and a second double bass. His groups used this collective improvisation, making use of dissonance and a very free tonality and free structurally. Some of his innovations. Well, we know that one of his biggest influences was Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy Gillespie had a great knowledge of theory. He was interested in extended harmonic changes in his melodic patterns, and those extended harmonic changes are the 9th, the 11th, the 13th. So those notes that are above the 1, 3, 5, 7, okay? Dizzy also was known for high-speed performance and his technical prowess, and Coltrane emulates that all very well. In fact, he owns it. Coltrane developed his own harmonic approach, which is largely based on substitute chords. And he used dissonance, blistering speeds. He weaved his own melodic patterns through complex harmonic changes. That's not obvious at first. Now, what a substitute chord is. So oftentimes a cadence is like moving from a 4 chord to a 1 chord, or a 5/7 chord to a 1 chord. So a substitute chord is, instead of going from 5 to 1 like a cadence would do, you would go from maybe flat 2 to 1, or maybe flat 7 to 1, or maybe a fully diminished 7 to 1, or a fully diminished 2 to 1. And so these substitute chords were a trademark of his, okay? And once introduced, they've continued. You see that through jazz today, okay? Listen to Giant Steps and you'll hear a lot of that. He was known for the extension of modal. Now, this is what he shared in his years with Miles Davis. So that would be infrequent chord changes, as opposed to bebop, where there was a chord change going on all the time. So this slowed the harmonic rhythm down. So when he's using a slow harmonic rhythm, meaning not very many chord changes, and the harmonies seem frozen, he's in modal. When he's using fast ones, he's in bebop or hard bop. When he's using the frozen version of this, when the harmony finally changes, it creates a significant event structurally and harmonically. This modal / free, read this. So this combination of modal and free was a landmark performance that culminated in A Love Supreme. Here on this slide, we're talking about my favorite things. I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. So Coltrane's improvisation grew from modal to free jazz. by extending harmonic chords until they no longer function. In fact, they were kind of created an atonality. And you hear that in A Love Supreme. Those upper harmonics we've talked about, the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th, those are landmarked of his. Some of the listening was Alabama, My Favorite Things, Manifestation, and A Love Supreme. You probably know My Favorite Things, and that would be very well worth a listen to see what he does that. So when Coltrane was experimenting, he was playing bebop. How he extended that culminated in the giant steps. So again, recommended listening. His modal and free exploration culminated in A Love Supreme. Okay, let's move on here. Hold on a second. His legacy. Well, long disjunct melodic lines, frozen harmonic centers, emotional intensity. He believed improvisation should continue past melodic harmonic considerations and the rhythmic flow to free form. He was looked upon as a spiritual leader by other jazzers. Folks responded at first to, and this should be a 1, I don't know why I put a 2 there. So folks responded at first to Coltrane's technical prowess. That was what captivated them about his work. But as his work became more artful, for example, in A Love Supreme, he finally became recognized for his creativity. His playing jazz was a spiritual experience for him and also for others who listened to him. He was explaining in his music the wonderful things that the universe meant to him. He continually experimented. His fans learned to expect the unexpected. In 1965 alone, he won 4 downbeat polls. Record of the Year for A Love Supreme, Jazzman of the Year, Hall of Fame. He was entered into the Jazz Hall of Fame, and he was voted the #1 tenor saxophonist of the year. Musical structures are forever changed because of Coltrane. So his association with Monk is very important. Take a listen to Trinkle Tinkle and some of his ensemble developments. You can read about this. And again, I want to point out there's a short biographical, very short here, that you might enjoy looking to and listening to and getting a sense of the man. Have fun with this.